Hey, welcome everybody, however many people there are. I suppose I should say good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to Tales from the Jar Side, the video stream, the live stream, I should say. Let me adjust this a little bit. You can see I've had some legal issues recently, I suppose. Maybe I shouldn't put that in there. I don't know. I should warn you, we might be getting a visit. Oh, Simon's here. That's great. Do you see the, Michael, you see the comments? Here, I can click on this to show it.
There we go.
See Simon. We might have good old Dan Hinojosa dropping by. That could happen. But I don't know if we will have time for him. See that something about that background is messing up the green screen. Let me get rid of that. I mean, it was funny gag to start off with, maybe, but I think that's good enough. Let me just switch to this, see if that helps any. Okay, for those who are not aware, I am joined by the inimitable Michael Carducci. Hands-on dude, you spelled independent wrong. It's an ENT, not an ANT.
Fail.
But yeah, hands-on independent architect. And of course, I also mentioned the I got to tell Dan about this. Okay, there. Sorry about that. As I say, Dan Hinojosa may drop by. I just don't know that we'll have time to talk to him. I don't know we have that going on. Okay, so Michael, why don't you mention, or are you fixing that, or are you? I don't want to interrupt you while you're doing that.
I don't believe. Oh, there we go. Edit name and headline. Independent.
Okay, and I could turn off the ticker for the moment here. There we go. Great. We are live streaming on both YouTube and LinkedIn, and as well as, believe it or not, Facebook, although I'm not sure why. Because I guess I didn't want to go to Twitter anymore, and I don't believe in that even works properly now that it's the site formerly known as Twitter. But why don't you take a moment to tell people who you are, to explain a little bit what you do, and then we'll dive into this stuff. In the meantime, I'll bug Dan Hinojosa.
All right. Well, yes, as Candace said, my name is Michael Carducci. My headline here is a hands-on independent or independent, depending on how you're feeling and how much coffee you've had this morning. Hands-on independent software architect. I'm a knowledge graph grease monkey. I'm a magician, mentalist. I'm a lot of things, but I think probably maybe the focus for this is my more technical chops, but I don't know. We'll see where the stream takes us. And hello and good morning, good afternoon, or even good evening to everybody out there, depending on where you are in the world or when you are watching the replay.
Wait, what was that grease monkey part? What was that again?
Oh, a knowledge graph grease monkey.
Yes.
I think that's an apt description for some of the stuff I do in that space.
What does that even mean?
Get my hands dirty, make messes, make things happen, fix things, break things. Is that not a common term anymore? This idea of a grease monkey. A grease monkey, I think, is just like a mechanic.
Yeah, mechanic, sure.
Yeah, but you kind of just but a grease monkey's more, I guess, of a jack of all trades, master of none in the general maintenance, fixing, building, rebuilding kind of phase of things. So, so years and years ago, a really interesting and early friend and mentor in my journey in life was a guy named Murray Altheim, and his webpage still occupies its corner of the web, although it's mostly notable for having the largest, or at least one point, the largest collection of bunny names. And so a lot of the traffic that he got was from that. But really interesting guy in the kind of early informative days of the web. He was very into XML and SGML, and his tagline for the longest time was SGML Grease Monkey, and I
Ah,
that so I stole it. Depending on who I'm talking to, I might steal other monikers like Brian Sletton. For the longest time, had forward leading software engineer. I think that's part of my resume headline if I ever send that out to anybody ever again. But
wait, you remember what Neil Ford's job title was for many years? I don't know if it still is.
I think it still is software architect and meme wrangler.
Meme wrangler. That was back when you used to have to explain to people what a meme was.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that was when people would often call them memes.
Right. Well, for those who are not aware, I mean, I met you when you joined the No Fluff Just Stuff tour. Roughly, do you remember when that was? What year that was?
When I joined, or when I first made an appearance,
When you first
because I
made an appearance, I think it was.
so I first made an appearance at the very first or second UberConf. So this would have been 2008 or 2009, somewhere around there. Jay found me. Jay, of course, for those of
Zimmerman.
us probably know, is the organizer and founder of No Fluff Just Stuff, the tour, and the series of destination conferences as well.
Yeah.
But Jay found me online on a now defunct website that was at the time called Gigmasters, which was basically a talent directory and kind of half of an online agency. And he sent he posted an event. He was looking for entertainment for this UberConf. He was looking for something to kind of break it up and add some levity and some break up the intense focus of that intense event, really. And he was looking for somebody to come in and do a magic show. So
Mm.
I responded. I put together a proposal and a quote for him. He accepted it. Nobody really knew that at that time my day job was still in tech. I was still a hands-on software engineer and just doing that kind of work. So when I came to give a show for a bunch of software engineers, of course, I took everything I knew and kind of meld those two worlds together. And I recall afterwards overhearing conversation in the reception. Jay likes to put together these outdoor receptions after these events where there's an open bar and appetizers and things like that. People are like, wow, the magician was making cucumber jokes. That's a deep cut. He must have really done his homework. But it was so
Cucumber,
well received.
not the vegetable, the actual software, the
Yeah.
behavior-driven development and all that.
Yeah, and I think I was making some kind of I'm sure it was a great joke, but some kind of joke about behavior-driven magic or something
Right.
like that, BDM. But it was so well received that Jay invited me to do magic again later that year in Florida at what was the Rich Webb Experience, and I kind of repeated the show again. Still very popular. My phone is strobing at me. Still a very popular. And before I knew it, about a year or so later, a couple of years later, Jay started bringing me in for more events. And I think I did UberConf again a few years later. I did the Rich Webb Experience again a few years later. I did Spring 1 2GX at one point in Chicago. Almost got thrown out of the hotel with the after hours magic, which is a different story for a different day. And I think after Rich Webb, he said, sit down, get your calendar out. And he started scheduling me to do the same show at some of the tour stops.
Right.
And at some point in there, he figured out that I've had these dual professions for equal lengths of time. So for as long as I've been a professional magician, I've also been a professional developer, architect, whatever, DBA. I mean, I meandered through life in my career, but I think I did 6 or 9 months just as the resident magician on the No Fluff Just Stuff tour before Jay finally said, hey, have you ever thought about speaking? And I said, no. He says, well, think about it. And before I knew it, I was on the sort of central cast and starting lineup of the No Fluff roster. And I've been sort of doing that ever since.
Yeah, for those who are not aware, the way the No Fluff Tour works, first of all, No Fluff Just Stuff is at nofluffjuststuff.com. So if you're interested, that's the website. It's that Jay Zimmerman, who runs the tour, basically makes all the decisions about who is going to be a regular on the tour. And he makes those decisions pretty much on an annual basis, although he will bring in people for some of the destination conferences like UberConf or Rich Web or whatever, the, I guess, software architecture conference, and a few others like that, as kind of a tryout, or if they're local or things like that. And if you wind up on the tour as a regular, then it used to be you'd spend, I don't know, 10, 15 different weekends a year traveling around the country, giving talks at several cities, around the US. They were all domestic, at least for the time I've been on the tour. I know they had a brief dalliance with a couple sites in Canada, but that was before my time.
I think
But
London once as well.
uh, did they ever actually go there, or they always talked about it? I mean, I don't know.
It predates me, but I'm aware. I'm vaguely aware of either a past or potential London show at some point in history.
Yeah, well, I'll have to ask Nate Shuda because he'd remember, But most of the cities on the tour are what they often call, quote, second tier, just in terms of size. So, I mean,
Mhm.
although New York was on the tour for a while, but they don't go to San Francisco or places like that. They go to, Denver and Columbus and Boston and, well, DC, of course, and Minneapolis, several of them multiple times in a year. Of course, everything was kind of clobbered by the pandemic, and we're still kind of recovering from that. But it's an interesting gig because you wind up giving, you basically are at that point a professional speaker. I mean, in addition to your day job, because you're giving, I don't know, what would you say, 4 to 8 talks a weekend kind of thing, multiple
Yeah,
times a year?
I think that's typical, and then I tend to do more. I think the
Yeah.
next show I'm currently scheduled to do 12.
Really? Which
So
show is that?
that's Columbus. So that's
That's
coming up
fun.
at the end of September.
Hmm. Right. And you also, well, at any rate, just again, for those who are not aware, in Austin, Texas, and Seattle, several other places. And the destination shows are normally during the week. So that like UberConf would be like a Tuesday to Friday kind of thing. But all the regular weekend shows would be just half day Friday and then Saturday, Sunday, or sometimes just 2 days. And the idea is you wouldn't have to miss much of your day job, and neither would the attendees, and you didn't have to travel. The attendees didn't have to travel to shows. They could go to their local show, and we would visit the same sets of cities and the same hotels every year. And
Mhm.
it's fun, I mean, and of course you give the same more or less set of talks all year long, although Jay always wanted new ones for the fall, right? And then totally new ones every year. I mean, Venkat, of course, Venkat would do all new talks every year. But what are
Venkat
you gonna?
gonna Venkat.
Yeah, I mean, as Nate says, he's remarkably lifelike. But at any rate, I was on the tour for a couple of years before you joined, as I recall.
Mhm.
And I remember you made quite an impression, and nobody, as you say, realized at first that you had all these technical capabilities and did all this technical work. But what we really do on this live stream, what I like to emphasize is, let's talk about your history. How did you get involved in all this, and how did you become interested in development? But I also know that one of the best things you brought to the table right from the beginning is this just amazing stories. I definitely, at some point, you've got to tell the story in the UK with the cops and all of that. Do you want to start with that, or do
Oh.
you want to tell more of your history?
Well, let's start with the history. I think we'll
Yeah,
get there because I mentioned that I had these dual professions, these dual skill sets, whatever you want to call them. They were professions. I was a professional magician. I
right.
still am. Actually, I'm flying out to Florida Friday to do a show out there. Um, and but it's in the
I
meantime,
will
I'm doing
mention, by the
freelance
way,
work.
I have to tell you, the thing that made such a huge impression on me is the time you asked me for like $100 or something, and wound up extracting it out of an orange.
Oh yes. Well, you extracted it. I didn't touch the orange at all. That's uh, one of my favorite plots in Magic is this idea of an object to an impossible location. It's logically straightforward. It's utterly impossible. It's surprising. I mean, there's a lot that you can really do with that. There's all kinds of different types of plots, predictions and divinations and vanishes and appearances and things like that. But that object to impossible location and transposition, two items just like instantaneously changing places, is those are sort of among my favorites. But having these two professions, they are actually much more intertwined than you might think. um, I started programming about the same time I started learning Magic, when I was like late 1980s. Really,
Ah,
I had an Apple II that was teetering on the brink of obsolescence, and none of the little stores in Wyoming carried anything for an Apple II at that point. The IBM PC clones had become dominant, and if you were buying something Apple-y at that point, it was probably a Mac. And the Apple II was dead. It just not was, and the team just didn't know it yet. But that was how things were going. So I started reading all the books that came with the computer, and I read a book on Basic and taught myself Basic. I decided the next logical step after finding a few books on the subject was 6502 assembly, which is
oh wow.
sure, why not? Let's do that next. But most of the 90s was spent with me building little apps and little jokes and pranks. My favorite was a program I wrote in the, I think, early to mid 90s that would randomly shift your keyboard layout one key over.
Oh, that's
And
evil. That is so evil.
yeah, it was a April Fool's Day prank for my mom,
Mm,
and because she was chatting to her fiance back when meeting somebody and forming a relationship based on meeting somebody on the internet was still a radical proposition. Today, it's
right.
like two-thirds of couple stories. Well, we met on such and such website. But
Yeah.
back in those days, the question was always, how do you know he's not an axe murderer? And I think my mom's point was, why is everybody just assume axe murder? I mean, there's so many horrible things a person can be.
Oh, do you
Why
know
why
that
does
ex murder? You know that ex murder joke though, right?
tell me?
Yeah, uh, I'm hitchhiking and a guy pulls up and opens the door or I'm driving rather, and I pull over and I to pick up a hitchhiker, and the hitchhiker says, "How do you know I'm not an axe murderer?" And I say, "Well, the odds of two axe murderers being in the same vehicle at the same time must be astronomical."
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. See, and if my mother was more quick-witted in the 90s, she might have said, well, the odds of two people being axe murderers are
Right,
just,
right.
that'd be a nice little comment there. But when that happened, when I did that, because she was getting up about 2 o'clock in the morning to chat with her then fiance, and she was just having such a hard time typing. I must be tireder than I think. Nope. Delete, 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 think. And then finally she
Oh
got to the point
no.
where she was physically hunting and pecking and looking at every key she pressed and verifying it. And when she pressed a key that was definitely the right key and it came up wrong on the screen, she filled a bucket of ice water and dumped it on me in bed and said and screamed at me to fix it.
Well, you
uh,
deserved it. Yeah.
I did. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's fair, and I did. And in fact, I once wrote a program that perfectly mimicked the school login screen when I was in college, and in fact, you would log in, and it would of course write everything to a file, and then pop up the message says either your username or password is incorrect. Please try again. And when you clicked OK, it would actually log me completely out and give you the real one. You'd log in, nobody'd ever know. My favorite part of that was one day I was in the school library going around setting this up on every single machine. And Noel, who was the administrator and the IT professor, he wondered what I was up to. So he logged into one of these machines just to see what I had been doing. And now I had a
Oh no.
domain administrator account and so many good times. But what's interesting was that it was the magic that really launched my career, not only as a speaker, because I wouldn't have any connection to the No Fluff Just Stuff tour if not for the magic, but I wouldn't have probably an IT career, or at least a very different one if not for the magic, because around the late 90s, I became the house magician at TGI Fridays because, dreams really do come true.
Yep.
That was my big break in show business. And of course, I'd go there a couple days a week, a couple afternoons or evenings a week, and go around and do magic for the guests at their tables while they're waiting for their meals or during coffee or whatever made sense. And after a while of this, I realized that as glamorous as such a life was, house magician at TGI Fridays didn't pay the kind of money to support the lifestyle to which I'd like to become accustomed to.
Right.
And I think I was having dinner with my mom one night, and I said, maybe it's time that I got a real job. And of course, she gets up around the table using a big bear hug, and, oh, honey, I'm so happy to hear that. And just as timing and fate and chance and provenance would happen, she said, well, there's a guy at my church who has a software company. His name is Martin Anderson. You should look him up, maybe talk to him. Maybe they're hiring, entry-level positions, junior dev, something like that. So I get on the web and I go to my search engine du jour. It was Alta Vista or InfoSeek or one of those. Maybe I asked Jeeves. But I found his company website. Looked like a thriving little bespoke software development, gung-ho, whatever you need, we'll build it for you. We'll do it for you. And as I dug a little deeper, I found somewhere in the vast recesses of his server, his personal homepage. So those of us who are around in the 90s, that was one of the things that we all sort of did as the web came online and began to blossom. We realized, I guess I better learn this HTML thing. And we would all make these little personal homepages.
Right.
It's just, here's some pictures, here's some quotes, here's some really terrible animated GIFs, under construction animations everywhere.
And a user count too, right? You had to visit.
Oh, yeah, you had to have that counter. You had to have that counter. And it was a Perl script in the CGI bin folder.
Ooh.
And so, but that was also kind of a flex because a lot of the hosting that was available to us mere mortals didn't allow any kind of server-side execution. We didn't get CGI bin.
And they were right too, but still, yeah.
Yeah. But I read this guy's whole life story, and he, of course, the web rings. I'm trying to join a web ring right now, but link circles is what Simon said. I was a member of Rings, and I think the Blue Ribbon campaign was on there, and then I think Free Kevin factored prominently.
Oh my goodness, that was a while ago.
Yeah, may he rest in peace. But I found his homepage, and it talked about his background. He talked about his family. He talked a lot about his family. Guy, big family, loves adores that family. And just as fate would have it, that very next day, I was doing the afternoon shift, Sunday afternoon at TGI Fridays. So I'm going around table to table, introducing myself, trying to, hi, I'm Michael. I'm the wandering magician. I was wondering if you'd like to see a few tricks, which was a brief but regrettable opening line until somebody finally took me aside and said, yeah, they might chuckle, but not all laughs are good laughs. But I went to this table. It was one of the larger tables. There was a large family there. I introduced myself, and the man, the patriarch of the family, says, well, good afternoon, Michael. My name is Martin. This is my wife, Grace, my daughter, Vanessa, my daughter, Hannah, my son, Jason, my son, Michael. That's the guy.
Yeah.
Like, that was the guy.
How about that?
I literally stayed up half the night reading all about. Now, there's two ways to handle this. I handled it like a magician. I didn't say a word.
Right.
I just go into my first little opening routine. Most of the family, their reactions are quite animated. Whoa, Martin. Yeah. Huh. And he leans in and scratches his chin. And I look at him. I said, Martin, that's a typical right brain reaction right there. You must be an engineer or something like that. I bet you studied something like natural sciences somewhere like Oxford or Cambridge. I knew, but, I'm playing with this now. And for a moment, for just a brief second, he allowed himself to be astonished before, like, the engineer brain kicked in. He started probing again. He says, "Oh, yeah? What did I study?"
Oh,
And I
no.
take a step back and I hem and haw and I say, "Well, I mean, I've only just met you, but based on our brief interaction, I would say you're the type of individual that would have studied something on the purer end of the spectrum." And by that, I mean not just, botany, which is applied, narrowed, specialized, biology, not just biology, which is just applied chemistry. Now, maybe something kind of there or left, not geology, not whatever. I said, I'm going to say chemistry or physics. No, I think you majored in physics. And again, his eyes went wide, and then he says, "Where did I study?" And I looked at him, and I looked him up and down. I said, "You're an Oxford man through and through. In fact, I think you have a master's in physics from the University of Oxford." And of course, I was in danger of taking it too far at this point, but that didn't stop me. Grace said, his wife said, "Michael, you are very perceptive." I said, "Grace, your accent. You're from the Philippines." She says, "Yes, but specifically." I told her what island she was from and how long she'd been in the UK and all of these things. And I did not leave that table until I had doled out every single fact of information that I had on that family. Of course, their food came. They didn't care. It got cold. They didn't care. 3 times the GM walks by, and I didn't care. And then at the end, when it was like I had run out of information, I had exhausted my repertoire. I had exhausted my my little dossier on this family that I'd accumulated the night before. I said, "Well, look, I should probably get to some other tables. You should probably get to your lunch." But you mentioned at one point, I think, that you had a software development company. Well, I'm also a keen amateur programmer, and if you ever had any openings for an intern or a junior developer or something like that, I'd be honored to be considered. And he stood up, looked me in the eye, reached out his hand, took mine, and said, "If you're half as good at that as you are at this, you're hired." And
Wow.
that was my first job in tech.
And you were half as good.
Yeah, at least.
So
At
really, I
most,
was gonna
yes.
say, I mean, when did you fess up that you saw his webpage?
To this day, Martin and his family are still good friends of mine. I was actually in London a while back. I took a little side trip going to a conference in Denmark, and we had lunch and everybody got together. It was good times. I'm still not sure he knows this story, but because once a certain amount of time passed, and like in the beginning, I don't want to like blow my cover, and then after a while, like there was a window there to fess up, and I think that's passed. And now the statute of limitations has run out. So if he finds it, hopefully we'll still be friends. Martin, if you happen to be watching this, I hope you're well, and much love to your family.
Okay, well, I gotta bring in Dan for a moment, who coincidentally seems to have gone with the exact same background that I had. I started with that background, Dan.
Oh, you did?
This is oh yeah. I changed it already, but I had that. Dan, let me just say, I'm glad you're here. We're kind of busy at the moment. I mean, I'm talking to Michael, but hang around. We'll see if we can work you in before the end. Okay.
All right.
So you don't
Sounds
mind,
good.
right?
Yeah,
You'll
no.
be okay.
I'm good. I'm good.
All right. All right. Well, nothing personal, at least not as far as you know.
No problem.
We'll get back to you a little bit later.
All right. Sounds good.
I do like, Dano, that you have that exclamation point there. That's not compensatory like Jeb, but it is more the fact that I don't think I can say Dano. I can only say Dano.
Right. Yeah. It has
Well, you have to say Bookham Dano, right?
Right.
I mean,
yeah.
is that
There
way
is
too
no
dated a
condition
reference?
where the word Dano should be like silent or, just bland. It has to have an emphasis to it.
Okay, well,
But it can be an interrobang, because there have been times where I'm like, Dano.
Mm-hmm.
okay, well, we'll get back to you. Okay,
All right.
somehow, I promise.
To be continued.
Yeah, I got to remove him, man. You let him start talking, it'll just go and go.
Well,
So
and me too. And if there's two of us, sorry, Ken, it's not your channel anymore. It's not your stream anymore. Dano and I will we will take it. It will be ours. Oh yes.
For those who are not aware, good old Dan Hinojosa is another speaker on the No Fluff Tour and a trainer like I am. He does technical training classes and has an interesting history as well. He is based in Albuquerque, which of course is actually they were good. Oh, he was showing me the other day that I think it was one of the news channels, and maybe I won't say which one, accidentally put Albuquerque in Arizona, you know.
Oh. I mean, I can start to guess.
Yeah, you probably could. Yeah, but you know, he's in New Mexico. But we'll get back to Dano maybe. You know, we'll see how it goes. Since you were already talking about being in the UK, you've got to tell the cop story then.
Sure. So that was in the UK. I was in the UK from 96 to 06.
Yeah.
I was there for
and what
about
were
10
you doing?
years. Well, I finished school there. I entered, I think, I started school in England as I guess that would make me a junior in high school.
Oh,
The systems are a little bit different, but I did some education there and then started working for Martin until the economy kind of started to be unpleasant. So this was 2000, 2001 was, I think the end of 2001 is when we finally shut down. But but I was doing both. I was still performing and I still had my kind of quote unquote day job as a software engineer. And that meant, of course, that weekends, I was always going somewhere in the country to do shows. All my PTO was in support of going and doing a show somewhere. Every now and again, I get booked somewhere exotic like Amsterdam or Dubai or something like that. But for the most part, I was performing domestically in the UK. Now, the early 2000s were an odd time that we still hadn't quite built the rich set of tools that we have today that drive our lives. I was using an early online map system called Multimap because I had to get to some show somewhere. And Multimap was kind of like the UK MapQuest. You'd go on there and type your address, and then you could print your directions. And for some reason, I never thought it made sense to go and reverse the directions and print them that way. And that was always a mistake. And I never learned from that because in the UK, there's a lot of one ways. There's a lot of, you just can't retrace your steps to get home. It's a different process. And so coming at the end of a show, there's a lot of cognitive load on me trying to get home, looking at my maps, looking for street signs. In the US, all of our street signs are pretty high up, typically either on the street lights or on the traffic lights, or at least on poles. In the UK, they like to put them down on the ground on these squat little signs. And they save some money not using that kind of retro-reflective paint or whatever the term is for that paint that glows. So they're low down, they turn black at night, and they're often covered by shrubberies and things. So I was returning from a gig. Now, in the early days of my career, I had no idea how to make any kind of meaningful money. I think I was probably losing money on every show I did, but I didn't care. I loved it. And I just wanted to get out there. But I used to talk to the older seasoned pros at the Magic Club, and they would give me different tips on how to make more money, and just little subtle upsells that people don't even notice. It's not an upsell, you're giving them more. But you know, there's a nominal cost associated with this.
Nominal.
So there were a couple of these. One is, instead of using regular cards you buy at the store, you can offer to sell them to upsell them on cards that, rather than the generic design, they had their logo or the bride and groom's name and the date or whatever on there. And there was a guy who would make these pretty cheap, and he would buy the nastiest cards that you could buy that don't have this air cushion finish that the bicycle, and these are tally-hos, but the air cushion finish or any of that, they didn't have any kind of finish at all. But that's okay, because the old timers, before we had these modern card manufacturing processes, had developed a technique using something they called fanning powder. Fanning powder is basically zinc stearate. And it's like a dry lubricant. Zinc stearate. But it's dry lubricant essentially for your cards, and there's a process to treat them. And you go to the magic shop, they would buy zinc stearate in bulk from an industrial supplier, and then they would apportion it out in little bags and sell these at an insane markup, because everything in the magic world has an insane markup. So I had some fanning powder in my custom cards. And the other piece of advice, but they said, yeah, just charge them, £5 a deck or something like that. And Alan would do them for one. And, it's a little more money. And, at that time, at that age, I mean, that £4 net profit can make all the difference. The other thing they said was always get paid in cash, with a wink and a nod. And that was another way to keep some more of your money. Right. And so I was just like, well, yeah, but I don't know how to ask a corporate company where they have a PO process and things like that where you got to raise an invoice and all of this. They're not going to pay me in cash. They're going to pay me in a check. He says, well, just tell them it's part of the trick and then work the money into your act somehow. And so I read about Kreskin, who would, that was his finale. He would have somebody hide his check somewhere in the theater, and then he would, read their mind and find it somehow, divine it with dowsing rods or something. And then I read one of the books that's actually on the shelf behind me, Ted Leslie's Paramiracles. And he has a routine that he used to do that was one of these sort of Russian roulette type of routines. But instead of, Russian roulette, the bullets or spikes in your hand, it would be Russian roulette with your fee in cash. And so now I didn't possess the kind of personality and gravitas and whatnot that this sort of imposing German magician had. So it didn't quite play the way that I hoped it would. But I almost did it verbatim as it was in his book, that you bring somebody on stage. And I would always get sort of the most beloved character in the organization. This was often the tea lady, this elderly, this typically an elderly woman who made tea and would push the tea cart around every day at 3. Everybody loved the tea lady. So I'd bring her on stage, and made for a lot of drama because she would take my fee, the cash, put it in an envelope and mix it with 4 others that contained tissue paper. I would don a blindfold. She would mix them up. And I had a very expensive fireball. I would snap my fingers, and about 3/4 of the time, the bowl would just burst into flame. And 1/4 of the time, I'd lose my whole showiness, and I'd have to go over there with matches or a lighter or something and get that thing burning. But don the blindfold, she'd mix them up, and I would instruct her dramatically to, one at a time, throw the envelopes into the fire. And this was the gag that Ted Leslie had, was you carry a starter pistol or a prop gun. In this case, it was a prop gun that I stole from the theater department, but I was also a theater kid. No surprises.
What a shock.
And I stole it. I never gave it back. And I had it, and it was a fairly realistic revolver. Not like today where you've got the rules of all the things that you have to do to not get shot. But also the odds of getting shot in England are pretty low, typically, or at least historically. And so
okay, everything's set up now. So
the trauma of this piece was when we were down to 2 envelopes, I would have her face me. I'm still blindfolded. And I would say, okay, the envelope in your right hand, take it, throw it in the fire. Now. And she would throw it in the fire. I'm almost a little bit aggressive, startle her a little bit. And I would just like, now. Wait, no, sorry. My right, your left. But at this point, it's already in the fire. And now you've got this moment. And so then I would hear the chuckles, the nervous laughter in the audience. I'd rip off the blindfold. I'd look at the audience. I'd look at her. I'd see her sheepishly holding the wrong envelope in her hand. And I would say, what have you done? And then I would try to look menacing. I don't think it worked. It's hard for an 18-year-old to look menacing, or however old I was. Pretty young. I would try to look menacing, and I would say, you better not have screwed this up.
God.
Or else. And I would pull out this pistol. Pro tip, never pull a gun on the tea lady.
No.
Like, sure way to lose an audience.
Yeah.
But it was all a setup for the gag, because you pull it out, or else. and you'd pause for like 2 beats, and then your facial expression would just completely melt because I really need that money, and and that was the gag. That was a little switch, and then of course I'd reveal everything's fine. There's the money. Hey, give her a round of applause. Thank you so much. And they're just like, I'm so glad this guy is done.
Yeah.
And off I would go home. So I'm driving home one night
Yeah.
trying to reverse engineer my return route from my driving directions, which typically involved opening my briefcase where those maps were filed. And I think at one point I stopped at a gas station to get a snack, so I busted into the cash, and I guess my tracking while trying to read, while searching for street signs and all of those things, led me to my driving caught somebody's attention. It caught the attention of the municipal police, and I was stopped. And what started as a routine traffic stop, a pretty fancy driving you're doing there. Can I see your license and registration? Have you been drinking? Things like that. What started innocently enough suddenly and shockingly turned on me, because at one point we're having a conversation. The next point, I have been forcibly removed from the vehicle, and I am thrown onto the hood or the bonnet of my car, and I am now in handcuffs.
Right.
And this happened literally in the blink of an eye. I was not expecting, it was not prepared. It's 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning. I'm terrified. I have no idea what's going to happen. And the officer says to me, now, I'm going to search your vehicle. Is there anything I should know? And I'm thinking, yeah, it's a mess. I'm sorry. Practically lived in my car. He says, what am I going to find? I'm like, sandwich wrappers? He says, narcotics, firearms. And that's when it dropped on me. Because on the passenger seat of my car was an open briefcase, and on display was a stack of cash, a pistol, and little baggies of white powder. And that was what the officer saw. So as soon as I realized that, I'm trying desperately to explain this. I'm like, no, you don't understand. And of course, he's heard it all before. And he says, I said, no, you don't understand. I'm a magician. And he says, you could see like a little pattern interrupt was hit. And he's a magician, huh? Yeah, that's a prop and fanning powder. And, I'm trying to explain this. And he uncuffs me and says, okay, do a trick.
Right. Show me something.
He ended up showing him a card trick. And he put me back, hands on the hood, the bonnet. And he's like, back on the hood. And he goes into his car and does something. I don't know what. He's keeping an eye on me. He's on the radio. I can't hear him because I didn't know if he's going like tear up the ticket or get the shotgun. I guess wasn't going to happen there. But it turns out he called for backup because a few more minutes later, 2 more police cars show up, and they get out and they exchange pleasantries. And he says, so everything under control here? He says, yeah. Show him what you just showed me.
Yep.
And there I was at like 1:30 in the morning, standing in my headlights, doing a little show. But I didn't get a ticket. And in fact, it was about, I want to say 6 months later, I get a phone call, and the officer who originally pulled me over, he says, Mr. Carducci, this is PC. I forget what his name is. PC police constable. He says, this is PC so-and-so. Do you remember me? I'm like, oh, yes.
Oh, yeah.
This is indelibly burned in my mind. I will never forget this. And he says that they were having the precinct Christmas party, and they wanted me to come in and do magic.
You got a gig out of it.
I got a gig out of it. Now, the only thing he was advised, he said, whatever trick you do with a gun, don't do it.
Yeah.
But other than that, we look forward to having you. And
did he at least take the fanning powder or not?
He did not. He looked at it. I don't think he did taste it. I don't think he did that. But he looked at it. I think it was the wrong texture. This was clearly not. I don't know what.
I mean, I'm
you know
sure he
what.
looked at the pistol and realized pretty quickly it was a prop, right?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
He looked at all of this, and but yeah, they didn't take anything, thankfully, and lesson learned. Leave that stuff in the trunk.
Lesson learned. I mean, one of a list. I mean, oh my goodness. But yeah, I remember you told that story at one of the early No Fluff events that I remember seeing you at. I don't know if you told it 100 times, but I remember it once. And I think you had half the crowd rolling. It was great. But it also illustrated another thing that I found is characteristic of your magic, which is that you have this habit of making it look like the trick didn't work at all, that this was a complete disaster, nothing went right. And then, of course, it worked anyway. I mean, you do that on a lot of your tricks that I've seen. And also, I always try to tell the developers around, of course, they don't listen to me, but I always tell them, don't even try. Don't try to figure out how this was done. Don't try to work out the details. You can't. Period. You will never get it right. Just sit back and enjoy it. Kind of thing.
Well, and it's definitely a style that I do more for when I perform for engineers, because they're
Yeah.
they're just a different breed.
Ah,
Engineers can be the most challenging and the most fun to perform for. They're the most challenging because, like, they have a very logical way of thinking of the world. They pay attention to details. They tend to probe boundary conditions as a matter of course. And if you're not at a level where you can, of experience and knowledge and technique and things, where you can stay ahead of that, it can be a very miserable experience. But I've been doing this forever, so it was always a lot of fun for me. But the other one is to play to that logical framework through which they perceive the world,
right.
because just let them, yeah, cause effect, cause effect, cause effect, cause effect, cause effect. But I only know about it because I'm really smart, and I saw what was really going around. And then that's when you bring in the magic. And
And they never get it. They never get even close. I mean, it's almost part of the act at this point to watch the audience full of engineers trying to figure out what's going on, and eventually realizing that you manipulated them the whole time. They have no idea what's happening, especially because you combine that with making it look like the trick was a disaster. Like, whoops, you threw the wrong envelope in the fire or whatever.
yeah, or miscall something, or yeah.
Right. Now, another thing that you do on the tour, or you did, I don't know if you're still doing it this year, you had a whole talk on memory techniques, on ways to
uh
remember all sorts of interesting things. How did
yes.
that come about?
Well, so when Jay invited me to speak, my first thought was, what on earth do I have to talk about? The usual engineering habit. I love that.
Yeah,
Um,
with two B's, no less.
and bad spellers of the world untie.
Hey, Hobbit,
The
and tie.
eh, the Thanks for the solidarity. I'm sure he put that in there just as a
Oh yeah,
as
Simon. He's very, very supportive. It's great, very helpful. Thank you, Simon.
but the when Jay invited me to speak, I proposed two talks because I thought, who am I to be speaking on this tour of thought leaders and luminaries and other notable thinking persons such as yourself and Dr.
We all
Venkat
think that.
Subramaniam and Neil Ford, and I mean everybody. It's like all of these great minds on the tour, and then there's me. So, and not only that, it was even the space that I was working in at the time was more in the .NET space, and there was a very heavy Java JVM bent to the tour, so I can't really
Right.
talk about that. And then the other sort of cross-cutting things, there were smarter, better people to talk about those things. And I thought, well, what do I have to talk about? So I proposed two talks. One was called Art of the Impossible, and it was the very beginning of a journey from me realizing how the breadth of my meandering life made me more effective in all these different areas. But it was largely how being a magician made me a better software engineer, because it
It was
taught me to
great
look at
lessons for
problems.
everybody because, I mean, this is a field full of people who are career changers or who have unusual backgrounds or do things that are totally unrelated and yet make them better. So it was a great talk.
And that's your superpower, really. It's everything else you bring to the table. Your technical skills are just your ante. They get you into the game, but all they do is get you into the game. Everything that happens from there is everything else you bring to the table.
Right.
Magic taught me soft skills, presentational skills, people skills, reading people, psychology, problem solving, and and then it worked the other way too. Like being an engineer made me a better magician because I had new mental tools to think about how to create magic tricks that most magicians didn't have. So that was one. The other one was it was a memory talk.
Right.
And because among the things that I had studied as a magician were memory techniques, because it's very useful to be able to walk around a party and one person pulls out their phone in passing and types in their PIN code really quick and be able to instantly memorize that and associate that with the person.
I don't
Or
think
you're at the
that's what
bar.
I had in mind, but okay.
Yeah, or at the bar, somebody pulls out their ID to give to the bartender and the ID goes back on the table. I'm going to glance at it, memorize the date of birth. And then later in the night, I might just say, oh, I bet you're a Sagittarius. In fact, and I would always set up these situations where later the people who I had memorized facts about will challenge me to divine the exact facts that I had I'd previously memorized. And there's no way. I just met this guy. Yeah, but I walked past you 2 hours ago when you entered your PIN code. And really, really kind of fun, spontaneous moments that you could do with that. But in the process of learning those techniques, I learned how to memorize a deck of cards in a couple of minutes. But yeah, so that was the class that I taught a set of memory techniques. So specifically, the idea of creating memories by association, using kind of peg systems. We didn't really go into the whole method of loci, the memory palace. We did some of the more the things that we could cover and really get some coverage into in a short amount of time in one session.
Yeah, it came up for me. Remember when you wanted to teach people how to memorize digits of pi?
Pi to 50 places. And you learned a different way. You have a song. And I also understand you have some pipes.
No, it's yeah, that would make sense, but no. The way that happened with me is I was a high school kid, and when you are, 10, 15 years old, your memory is like, I mean, my observation in teaching people from, very young all the way through, well, older, that memory goes down as you get older and reasoning ability goes up. I mean, you may think you can't reason now, but try to reason with a kid. I mean, they can't reason their way out of a paper bag. It's just like you don't give a kid a mnemonic. You don't give them a way to remember something because that would require them to think, but they're freaking sponges. So I got into a stupid competition when I was about 16, I guess, with another nerd at high school. And we were memorizing digits of pi. And to this day, I can go 3.1415926535897932384626433. I mean, that's 25 digits without even blinking. I could probably I can go to 50 if I try a little bit, but I've got nothing after that. And the problem is, if I want to memorize something now, I mean, I have to go over it and over it and over it. It's just like I want those brain cells back. I want to be able to do that now, and I can't. But here you are in the middle of this this presentation teaching people how to memorize pi, and I'm like, oh, if he asked me for digits of pi, I've got 50 of them right here ready to go. The people would think that it was a plant,
Well, it was my favorite thing about that talk was they memorized pi to 50 places and didn't even know it.
Right.
That they had it before they even knew they needed it. And that was my little surprise twist.
It was a story or something, right?
It was, I think the structure that I had, as I struggled to remember, the structure that I had was I gave everybody a set of challenges just to kind of set a baseline of where we're starting. We're going to take a metric before and then after. And so I gave them a list of words to memorize,
Right.
and order mattered. And so I'd hold that up for 2 minutes, and then I would challenge them to write down as many as they could remember. I think the mean was about 6 or 7. And then I would teach them this idea of associations, essentially creating a doubly linked list in your mind: 1 and
Yeah.
2, 2 and 3, 3 and 4, 4 and 5.
But you did
And
it
it's
with a
doubly linked
story.
because you can go forward or backwards. And this idea of how all memories are associations, and the more unusual, the more likely it is to stick, just due to the sort of evolutionary mechanisms of memory. The stuff, survival depends on things being predictable. And every time you have something that doesn't fit in your normal worldview, your brain kind of sits up and pays attention to this. So you make these wild, crazy associations, exaggerated, and then they would repeat that list of we'd go through that list again, creating these associations, and then I'd say, okay, write them down now on a new sheet of paper. And they would typically write down all 25.
Yeah.
And then I say, okay, here's your next challenge, and I gave them a slide that was full of digits of pi, and I'd say, memorize that. I'd keep it up for about 2 or 3 seconds, just long enough for them to register what it was.
Right.
And then I say, okay, now write down pi from memory. And they're just thinking, what? And then I stop them. I'm just kidding. You already have pi memorized to 50 places. Right. And then I would explain this system called the major system, which allows you to encode numbers as words, because you can substitute numbers, digits, with phonetic sounds and build words out of them. And then you can visualize those, whatever those words are, much easier than you can visualize the numbers, and create those associations that stick. And that all of those first 25 words were 50 digits of pi: tire, towel, pen, shell, mule, vape, cat, moon, movie, roach, notch, ram, myth, man, and so on.
It was dramatic. Yeah. And I still got it wrong. I mean, I knew the digits of pi. I couldn't remember the words. So.
Yeah, it happened. But to this day, in fact, as recently as this March 14th, I got at least 2 emails from people who took that class 10 years ago.
Oh, wow.
And they just said, happy Pi Day. I still have it. And then they would.
Besides, you preferred Tau Day anyway. Never mind. Oh, look what happened. Hang on a sec. There's Dan.
Hi.
Dan made it back.
Yeah.
Sorry. Actually, let's see. How do I arrange that? I guess this is as good as it gets. We're still talking to Michael. We still have a few things to get through. So thanks for coming by again. I'm not sure we're going to be able to get to you this time. Nothing personal, as again, as far as but we'll have you back. We'll definitely, and we'll send you some kind of consolation prize. I'm sure there's an e-card I could arrange somehow, right?
All right, right on.
This isn't like the old Jimmy Kimmel gag with Matt Damon and.
No, it's just totally different.
Actually, it's completely and totally exactly that gag. Yes, but no, of course not. What was I thinking? Yeah,
some other time, I guess.
Yeah, some other time, but not this time. Bye.
Dan is he's probably gonna cry himself to sleep tonight, and that's on
his
you.
idea. I mean, Dan. He says, "You ever watch that thing with Kimmel and Matt Damon?" I'm like, "Not really, but I heard about it." Yeah, okay. Let's do that.
Did I just spoil the gag? I'm sorry, because that's where I was.
We were supposed to do it. Well, I probably would have said it myself. We were supposed to do it last time. We were supposed to do it the time Venkat was here, and Dan got busy. So
okay. Yeah, it only works as a running gag, I think.
Yeah, Simon mentioned, by the way, the memory thing. You remember the correct horse battery staple one? Remember that?
Yeah.
Yeah, add entropy to your password, and it was the XKCD cartoon and all of that. Yep. Yeah, I mean, I always. By the way, speaking of that one, I was on a plane once, sitting next to, I think it was a minister in a church, and he was like trying to handle the IT stuff for his little church there. And for some reason we were talking about passwords and security and all of that. Oh, wow. Simon remembers the XKCD cartoon number, 936. But at any rate, I told him, I said, look, if you want a completely unbreakable password, change it to the Lord is my shepherd. Just pick a Bible verse that there's no way you could ever forget. Put spaces
Yeah.
between the words too, because most password crackers never look for spaces. They may look for other punctuation, but they don't think of that. I said the security is all about length, and the problem with a long password is you think you can't remember it, but it's a Bible verse. You live it every day. Just try that. And of
It's a
course,
great to get an obscure one.
yeah, I mean, it's not a perfect system by any means, but it's much better than P@SSW0RD, or something like that.
Which I think is one of the top 10 passwords. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, just trying to get the point across that, add some entropy and add some length. It's really all about length, because there's no such thing as perfect security. You just want to be more secure than other people, than the other guy trying to run away from the bear. You know that story, right?
Oh yes, you don't have to be the fastest. You just need to
I
be
don't have to
faster than the
be.
slowest.
I can't. You can't outrun a bear. I don't have to outrun a bear. I just have to outrun you. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's that one too. So, but at any rate, that's I always think of that with the correct horse battery staple. Anagram. Well, not anagram. Meme, I guess, probably the way to say it.
Although most still enforce the rules: upper, lower number, special character.
Well, that's the annoying part, is that now you're cutting down the. I mean, when they announce those rules, they are basically telling the hackers what the search space is. Yeah, let's cut the search space to exactly these rules. It's like, oh my goodness.
And yeah, and then you can take dictionaries and run a few transforms, and you're probably going to get it pretty quickly.
But then you have to, yeah, well, and you have to remember too. But again, not a perfect system, but it doesn't have to be perfect. It has to be better. Then you have to make it so you're not worth. I mean, I always use the analogy of, when you drive to the corner store to get a quart of milk, do you lock your car? Well, of course you do, because locking your car is essentially zero cost. I mean, it's not difficult. But is that secure? Well, of course not. I mean, any real thief could break into that with no trouble at all, but then again, is it worth it? If my car is some beat up old jalopy and yours is your, I think, don't you drive a Maserati Bora, as I recall? Something like
It's a
that.
Mazda, but you're close.
But say you had a Maserati,
Yeah.
my car is secure. You know what I mean? Because it doesn't matter. Yours is the valuable one. But say in the back seat of my car, God willing, was stacks and stacks of $100 bills. Well, suddenly the value of the asset is high enough that I'm not secure anymore. But that's why they make armored cars, right? I mean, that's the whole point. But are armored cars secure? Well, not if you watch CSI Miami, where they used to knock off one every couple of weeks, right? So, I mean, again, we just talk about the expense of all this, making things more secure, and it's all being relative, and on and on and on. And, and ultimately what you're doing when you say, oh, the value of my data is priceless and the level of the threat is infinite, then what you're doing is basically hiring a motorcade, so that, with cops and helicopters and everything, just so you can go to the corner store to get a quart of milk. It's a very expensive solution to the problem. That's all.
Well, I'll tell you, the most ingenious anti-theft mechanism I ever saw was, I was somewhere. A group of us were getting together, having dinner or something like that. And afterwards, I got chatting with one of the guys. I said, well, I'll drive you to your car. And we got into my car, my old junker. This is my first car. It was a 1989 Ford Fiesta. 3-door hatchback, 900cc motor, 4-speed. That was it. Broken radio, but I was sure somebody was going to steal this hunk of junk. And so I had the big, elaborate, physical steering wheel lock in there. And so I'd get in and I'd fiddle with it and take it out and maneuver this thing into the back seat of my tiny car. And he says, why do you have that? I said, so nobody steals my car. He says, I don't have one. Nobody steals my car. So I drive him to his car in the parking lot on the other side of the shopping center. And he says, come here, I'll show you. And I walk over to his car and he opens the door. And the first thing I saw was a soiled diaper on the dashboard.
Oh my God.
And I was just like, good grief. That is disgusting. He says, isn't that great? It's a Huggies with a smear of peanut butter on it. And he just kept that on the dash. And nobody would just be like, oh, not that one.
I think I could have gone through the rest of my life without knowing that and been okay. Uh, all right.
You're
Any
welcome.
rate, let's talk about one thing. I know you have been very interested in architecture for many, many years, and of course, you've been a magician for many, many years. And you were talking to me at one point about you had some interesting thoughts about the combination of that. And is there some way you could just summarize that, just to give me a I mean, I don't know that much about architecture, just a basic, what the basic concept is?
So it's a little broader than that. I think I finally recognized and internalized the essential unity of all knowledge. That it's all connected, whether we want it to be or not, whether we think it is or not, it's all there.
All right.
And I mentioned this earlier that I started to explore this when I was trying to figure out what I was going to talk about at the tech conference. I'm like, I don't know, connect tech to magic. And it turned out there was a ton there. There's so much there. I even have, I have more content in this realm.
I mean, they call developers wizards anyway. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But it's finally realizing just how random things that we learn in our life. So I went through my midlife crisis a couple of years ago, right on schedule. And actually, I was a little early because I was watching an episode of The Simpsons when Homer had his realization that he had he had arrived at the midpoint of his life, and by coincidence, he says, no, but the average age of an American man is 73, and I'm 36 and a half or something like that, or 37, whatever it worked out to. And I was that exact age. And first of all, having somebody who's grown up with The Simpsons since season 1, to go from being Bart and Lisa's age to Homer and Marge's age is a little bit distressing. But and then just realizing that you're older than Homer Simpson, that one stung. But it was around around 40 that I was not happy in my job. I worked for a Fortune 100 major financial services company. I was their chief architect, and I wasn't happy there. And I was kind of, but I'd gotten so specialized that, looking at the jobs that were out there, I'm like, every architect posting had a very different set of requirements, and it gave me the imposter syndrome. And I, in 2020 just sort of blew away my magic career. And I didn't have the strength, let's call it, the will, whatever you want to call it, to like start from scratch and build it up from nothing like I did when I was 20. There was a great magician. I've got a number of his books behind me, Ted Anneman. Ted Anneman sadly committed suicide. He's very much older magician, the first half of the last century. But he very sadly committed suicide, and I never really knew why. And then at one point I read that at that point in his life, he was at a place where he needed to completely restart his career. And there's speculation that was part of it. And then I was at this point where I realized that, yeah, I could see that. I could see just being like, you know what? I had a good run. I'm done.
Wow.
But I mean, I have enough reason.
This story got darker than I thought it was going to get, but okay. I hope there's a good ending here.
Well, yeah. I'm still here, but I mean, I'm not. I'm in no danger. I'm in no danger of harming myself or others. I'm actually in a pretty good place, but it was a difficult realization, because I realized that I wasn't just going to completely restart, reboot, and create from scratch my magic career again, because that had all died. And my clients, it's just enough time passed with COVID that whatever momentum I had was gone. And I wasn't sure I wanted to keep going the direction that I was going with my career in tech. And I wasn't even sure that I had a career in tech anymore, because it just seemed like I wasn't qualified for anything. And now I've spent enough time in both fields to have long since passed the Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hours, threshold for mastery, if you buy into that or not. But the stark realization was, at my age, I don't know if I have another 10,000 hours in me in any one thing. Like where can I possibly go from here? And I read a few really influential books. I read Range by David Epstein. I read R. Buckminster Fuller's Operating Manual for Spaceship Earth, which very different work, but stresses the need to be a generalist and not a specialist, and why that's important not only for you, but for the future of humanity. And I was reading Richard Hamming of error correcting code fame, his book Learning to Learn, which is a collection of his lectures from his career, and he talks about this. I read a few different things, and finally started to connect the dots and realized that that my diverse background and diverse set of mental models and skills and experience is the point.
Right.
And that's the magic. That's the superpower. And so what I've been trying to do is to figure out what lessons my life have to teach me about problems I'm trying to solve today. And so that led me to this architecture workshop that I'm giving in November. Because in my career, I mean, I've more than a decade in architect type roles, and successes and failures, and really kind of looking back over both and trying to find the differences, reading a lot, of course, and trying to figure out what I can learn there, and then connecting my diverse background to all of it to try to create a new perspective, a new take, a new set of ideas. And so really the work that I'm doing in the book and the training course are at the nexus of a whole lot of seemingly disjoint ideas, but put together, it's a very compelling model for thinking about software architecture and being able to much more deterministically get the capabilities out of your system that the architecture promises, because these things fail. Projects fail at alarming rates.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's a lot of talk, of course, microservices in the conference world. It used to be microservices was like the free and conference bingo. But for all of the talk, all of the books, I probably have 10 books on microservices behind me. But for all of this, 90% of these attempts to adopt microservices fail, according to Gartner. Yeah, I think it's according to Gartner. I've got that stat somewhere. And I think by kind of connecting all of these things, I've found an interesting lens to look at the problem. And more than that, I mean, I've connected philosophy and metaphysics and alchemy and all of these weird things.
Let's leave that as a bit of a teaser. That's the workshop is listed on the No Fluff site. Is that correct? So
That's
on
correct.
nofluffjuststuff.com and just search for your name probably, or is it under virtual workshops?
I think it's right on top above the fold on the right. There's the tailor-made software architecture. But if you want to get an idea of what to expect there, there's like a 5-minute video or so that kind of gives the overview. There's a little PDF you can read more about it and download. But there's also last week I did a webinar and I kind of introduced some of these ideas.
Yeah, I was there.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's right.
No, I'm glad we brought it up. I'm glad you mentioned it. I'm sorry.
I've got to plug my pluggables.
Well, yeah. And, you know, I'm trying to wrap things up at this point too, but I'll just say by way of encouragement from somebody who's in a different generation than you are, I didn't find my dream job until I was about 40. I didn't write my first book until I was 50. And I didn't start my YouTube channel until I was 60. Okay. You've got time. You're doing fine. Don't worry about the 10,000 hours. Keep doing what you're doing. You're going to be great. I have no doubt whatsoever. You'll be quite successful.
Well, thank you. And I'm now excited. And you know, the biggest thing that I figured out is that I am, you know, now that I have this new way of thinking about what I learn and what I do and the work that I do, and how I've got enough time on this planet and experience as a human being to be able to look back over the last 40 plus years and start to see how all of these little puzzle pieces connect and all of these dots connect in ways that it didn't seem like made any sense looking forward, but looking backwards, like, oh wow, this did that and that did that, and it was always in unexpected ways. And so because of that, that's become my goal. That's become what drives me, is not any particular outcome, but just continuing to grow and continuing to build my breadth of knowledge and depth in strategic areas, and just to live life and explore and enjoy, and let myself be surprised when some little random thing I did because I decided to explore some alley in Singapore 2 years ago, suddenly is exactly the insight I need to, solve something in the future. So I'm less worried about the outcome. I'm more focused on growth, because when I get over focused on an outcome, I end up missing other opportunities or where I should be going. But it's so yeah, I'm excited. I'm in a good place, and it's a
I
fun
think
way to
that's
live life.
great. I feel like I'm going to be one of those people that said, "Oh yeah, I knew him when," uh, and it's just going to be quite an adventure, however it comes out. I mean, who knows? Some of these things, you never know how people are going to react to things, and you can't live your life based on how others are going to react. I say, as a person with a YouTube channel, which is entirely dependent on how people react, but nevertheless, oh, I should have put that banner up, shouldn't I? Wait a minute. There's the link for that. But I want to thank you very much for taking some time out of your week to join the live stream here.
Can I close out with
Sure.
one sort of parting thought?
Oh, absolutely.
Because there's one other aspect. I worked an event 6 months ago somewhere in the Midwest, Fargo, I think I was.
Of all places.
And I got chatting to an IT manager for a bank, or CIO or something like that, small bank, like a North Dakota bank. And we had dinner afterwards. And he was asking about kids. I don't have kids. He was asking me about a lot of things. And then as we were driving back to the hotel, he kind of looks over me and out of nowhere says, "How do you want to be remembered?"
Ooh.
And I thought about that because I was not prepared for that kind of question. And I finally came up with my answer. I said, "I don't know if I care about being remembered.
Wow.
I would rather have had my existence make an impact somehow." And but just like that fact that you learned 20 years ago that turns out to be the linchpin to solve a problem today, you never know what that's going to be, and you never going to know what that action is. I started in magic because I bought a book at the library on the last day of the library discard sale, and it's on my shelf too. It's worn to pieces. The cover's fallen off. The spine's damaged. I mean, it's basically held together by, glue and rubber bands. But the about this book, and I promptly put it on the shelf and forgot about it. And one day, my sister shows me a card trick and fools me and surprises me. I said, "Wow, that's really cool. Where'd you learn that?" She said, "In your book." And suddenly that gave me the motivation to actually read it and study it and learn it. And then, change I like to say that buying that book changed the course of my entire life. But that one little thing my sister did changed the course of my entire life. And she doesn't even remember it.
Yeah.
And so, like, that's how insignificant it was for her, but it shaped my entire life. And so I think if we go through life not so worried about immediate outcomes, but just plant these seeds, because I guarantee you, just the content you're producing is going to materially help people in certain ways. Just our interactions are going to can move it one way or the other, and we never know what they're going to be, and we might never see the outcome. But it kind of just becomes my philosophy for learning and just trying to deal with people and try to be a better better human being. But
yeah, you never know what impact you're having on anybody else. That's absolutely, I believe that absolutely. I mean, how do you know? I mean, unless they tell you, and
yeah,
maybe you won't run into them. Maybe it won't be a situation where they could say it. Well, with that said, I want to say, I really do wish you the best on all the things you're working on now, right? Oh
and
yes, indeed.
likewise,
And we'll keep in touch, but not necessarily on the live stream, And
yeah.
I want to thank you again for being here. I don't see any other comments that we need to address right now. So why don't we just say, again, thank you everybody for attending. And for those watching on YouTube, please feel free to leave comments or whatever you like, and I'll try to address them. And we'll see you next time on another Tales from the Jar Side live stream. Take care, everybody.
Thanks so much.